ladies and gentlemen. My name is Gregory Gottlieb, and I'd like to welcome you to this third debate from the Airship Association on various aspects of airships. We have a very dynamic and diverse panel joining us today. And I'm going to ask Dean to do something about the echo that I can hear in my ear, which will probably help everybody else as we come to speak. We're all learning as we go here. But what's interesting about this panel is that I am the only person on the panel in the UK, which as a large number of our members come from the UK, that makes it very exciting to be able to introduce our panel today. And I'm going to begin with brief introductions of everybody. First of all, from Canada, we have Professor Barry Prentice, who is the president of Isopolar Airships, but is also a professor of supply chain management at the Aspen Business School at the University of Faber, I think, Barry, nod if I'm correct. And we have from Pakistan, Mohammad Mohsin Raza, who is a relative newcomer to the world of airships. He's been involved in airships for a couple of years. He has a startup company based in Lahore called The Booster, but it also has aspirations to do things in Europe, and you'll hear more about that later. Then from South Africa, I'm very pleased to welcome actually our newest Airship Association Council member, Spencer Horn, whose company in South Africa is operating airships and has been highly successful in raising funding for airships, which is unusual in the airship community. So congratulations on that, Spencer. But I'm delighted to welcome you onto the panel from South Africa. And last, but by no means least, our long-standing council member, Johannes Eising, who has been designing airships since he was a teenager, probably, and is well known to anybody who flies model airships as being one of the FAI's model airship experts. So thank you to the panel for joining. This is going to be a very interesting debate. We've got lots of fun questions to ask, and I'd like to welcome all of you to either Facebook or to YouTube or to our website where we're streaming now for the first time. If you're watching on our website, we will have to ask you to go to either YouTube or Facebook if you want to ask any questions to the panel. The questions are being moderated by our council member, Danny Ford, who's responsible for membership. So thank you very much indeed, Danny, for working in the background. And of course, as always with these live debates, we are all extremely grateful to Dean Arnett, our producer, who's working the mixing desk and making sure that you can see and hear us whilst we're speaking. But some of you may not be that familiar with the Airship Association. So we've got a little introductory film that I'm going to ask Dean to roll now. I think that the Airship Association, as it grows, develops and evolves in terms of the service offerings that it can provide, will play a number of quite important roles as the industry grows. That will be in terms of lobby, seeking and garnering political support for airships. It'll be on the regulatory side, working with ICAO and the national aviation authorities to support regulations that are airship friendly. And it will be with industrial players working on standardization. And, for example, refueling methods, or masthead design, or undercarriage design, or airports that are designed for airships need to be able to take many different designs and types of airship. And so there are a range of ways in which the Airship Association can play an important role. Today, as an organization that needs to grow more and needs more volunteers all the time in order to attract resources that will enable us to act more effectively for the industry, we can only do a certain amount. But that will grow over time, and I hope to see that happen. The Airship Association website, which is www.airship-association.org, has basic information about the association on the homepage, and there's a link to our membership page where you can join. We have several categories of membership depending on your particular circumstances and how involved you would like to be. And we'd welcome you if you want to become a member, and I hope to meet you at a future conference. Thank you very much for that, Dean. I should perhaps point out to everybody watching that the Airship Association doesn't manufacture or produce any airships. All of those that you've just seen are AI-generated images of what the AI world believes airships might look like in the future. We don't endorse any of those designs, but it's interesting to see what AI comes up with sometimes. So now I'm going to go to the panel and ask each of them a quick introductory question, beginning with Professor Barry Prentice. Barry, where does the economic case for airships genuinely become compelling?
There are really three areas, in my view, and you can divide them as passengers, platforms, and freight. And each one has a compelling case. It depends on the investment to make this happen. Obviously, the platforms can be the smallest, and we see that developing now. Passengers doesn't need quite as big as a freight vehicle, but the certification issues are quite tough for that. And then the cargo airships will be the biggest, and I think in the long run, perhaps that's the biggest market for the airships.
Thank you very much, Barry. That's great. So next, I want to pose a question to you, Johannes. What can a modern airship do operationally that's materially different from its historical predecessors?
Well, what airships can do, Gregory, the late rigid airships were already astounding as compared to contemporary aircraft heavier than air. I mean, imagine you had a 20-ton aircraft doing a vertical takeoff and landing, at a vertical takeoff, flying some 4,000 nautical miles, carrying some 100 tons, and to do a vertical landing. So, and all this using about just 1/3 of the fuel used by an Airbus A330 or a Boeing 787 Dreamliner. And this has been done some 90 years ago. So to answer your question, the difference today is modern airships can do precision hover, also known as dynamic positioning. And this omits the need for a large ground crew like back in the days. So no aircraft heavier than air will ever be able to achieve such flight performance. And this is what I really like about airships.
Thank you very much, Johannes. That's a really interesting way of comparing the past with the present. So, Mohammed, I have a question for you just to kick things off. Why do you think that advertising is a credible commercial entry point for airships today? I can't hear you, Mohammed, so I suspect you might be on mute.
Yeah, sorry. So I was.
Could you start again?
So
yeah.
So advertising is a field that is always necessary for every business and every field. So therefore, always all the businesses need advertising. So airship, it's a unique way and a floating space for every business that they can use to promote more of their brand in the air. So airships are one of the best option and it's the persistence and long-term flight duration. So therefore, advertising is the best one of the solution for advertising with airships.
Thank you very much, Mohammed. And last, but by far means not least, Spencer. Which remote service or autonomous airship applications are already close to commercial reality, and why?
Thank you, Gregory. I think just to build on what Mohammed and Barry have shared, probably advertise the most mature use case. But what's very exciting is those that are now the nascent use cases which are coming onto the scene, and perhaps the ones which are already getting paid for today. We would look at things like reconnaissance platforms. We have companies like Kaloo who are doing that. We've had telecoms from Loon. And then at Cloudline and some of our peers, we're also doing airborne data capture, which is a very, very exciting use case. So all of those are commercial today.
Thank you very much, Spencer. And I'm going to ask each of you the same next. It's another sort of opening question, but I'm going to ask for a sort of one-sentence answer. And I'll go through in the same order. So in one sentence, what are airships uniquely good for that another platform cannot do so well? Starting Barry, what's your number one pick?
I'd say endurance.
Endurance. Okay, thank you very much. And next we have, who's next? Mohammed?
Yes, so it's for a long time floating capability.
Endurance as well. Okay, super. Spencer?
I have to pile on here, Gregory, and say endurance.
Okay, so we've got 3 endurance. Johannes, are you going to say something different?
Yeah, well, if you endurance and speed to range, then you have long range aircraft doing vertical takeoff and landing and doing all this quite sustainable with a very low carbon footprint.
Well done for managing to fit that all into one sentence. Thank you very much indeed, Johannes. That's brilliant. All right, so now I want to look at some different specific applications for airships. And the first one I want to look at is sort of operations, deployment, and market lessons. And so let me go to Johannes. What lessons from earlier airship successes and failures are most relevant to current airship developers, in your view?
I mean, the technology has been proven. We know it works. It has been deployed commercially. The point is there was like a break or World War II or in World War II where people thought, okay, you cannot really use them as a strategic weapon of attack. So, why to throw money at it? And this is where our development has kind of stopped. And the new approaches, and starting in the 50s and going to the 2000s and so on, many of these approaches try to reinvent the wheel and add some more bells and whistles, while we actually know that the technology itself is already pretty good. Right, so this is one point where I would say, okay, just let's use the old airships as a benchmark and see what do we have to change to make them more economically viable. The concept is already pretty good.
Thank you for that, Johannes. Next, I want to come to you, Barry. Which earlier airship applications should still inform today's business case, and which belong firmly in the past?
That's a very good question. I would say that the transocean transport is what I think is the key for the future in the airships too. This is something that was proven by the Zeppelins, carrying passengers from Germany to Brazil or Germany to the US. Even the Graf Zeppelin's trip around the world and crossing the Pacific so long ago. These vehicles can cross oceans. We don't necessarily need them for moving passengers today, but we do for cargo. And there's a lot of air freight in the world, and I think that's the biggest lesson we should have is, carrying large loads of cargo across oceans. As for what should we forget? Well, that's a good question, because I'm not sure what we really should give up on. Not enough has been explored of the airship technology in my mind.
Okay, that's a fair way of looking at past ones that should not be forgotten, perhaps. So, Spencer, let me come to you before I come back to you, Johannes. What operational lessons become visible only once an airship is deployed in the field, rather than discussed at the concept and design phase?
Oh, this would be a very lengthy list. I think the standout for me, I suppose, is the dism of mission planning. I think most folks who work in this industry would agree the weather is not something that we brush aside, it's something that we learn to work with. And that often means when we look at these very long endurance missions that airships are capable of, you've got to do a whole lot of planning ahead of time and get that all on the drawing board. This is the actual flight ops planning. But you've also got to have all of your contingencies in place in operation. And I think that we are very, very attentive to, just because of weather sensitivities.
Okay, so I'm going to come back now to Johannes. You had your hand up about perhaps Barry's answer. Do you want to address that?
Yeah, just briefly, just as a fun fact, we really should not stick to all the old materials and systems like gold beater skin, cattle intestines for gas bags, and meanwhile we have better airworthy qualified materials we can pull off the shelf and use it. And this just came to my mind when you asked what should we forget about.
Okay, that's super. Let me ask one more question to Mohammed. Do you believe that we're entering a new era of airships, or are we mostly seeing promising concepts that are looking for reliable markets? I mean, do you really believe that airships are going to become very popular and widespread, or do you think that there are just a few niche markets that need to be addressed?
There is not any specific domain where we just work with the airships. There is open many use cases. There is a multiple use cases we still see in the world. Some of working on sky lifting, other working on advertising, and then many other working on the we say transportation and the logistics, and also as the boosters working on advertising. So with the time there is many other things will also comes up, and there is many use case will also appears with the time.
Okay, thank you very much for that. Before I go on to any other questions for the panel, I'd like to remind our audience that we are open to answer your questions. Anything about what airships are good for, we're very happy to address as a panel. And if you want to ask questions, the best place to do it is on Facebook, but I think you can also do it on YouTube. And Danny is standing by waiting for those questions to start coming through. And I have one from Mikhail Baskov. Mikhail didn't notice any airship or hybrid companies at the Farnborough Air Show last month. Is that a sign of declining interest towards these aircraft types, or tight money, or something else? So I know that at least one of our panel members was at Farnborough. So maybe, Spencer, you're the best person to answer this particular question. Why weren't there any airship companies displaying at Farnborough?
Well, we've got a very specific reason, and that's that the UK regulation is quite something to wrap one's head around, and as a new jurisdiction to enter. But I share the sentiments of the viewer that I would have loved to see a stronger presence. I think the reality is that we've gone through cycles of support for airships at different scales, and Farnborough is likely the sort of place where we would see some of those bigger, to use Barry's definition, we play in the platform space, and that perhaps is not where we would be looking for customers necessarily. And so it's unsurprising that platforms are necessarily present, but I think perhaps there's a cyclicality to when the large airship manufacturers and some of the works that are still in concept can come through to shows like these. Hope we'll see more next time.
I hope so too. I very much do. I think we may well do. So let me turn to one particular use of airships, and that's cargo. And I'd like to bring you in, Barry, on a little bit more specific. You're a professor of supply chain logistics, and we've known each other for a number of years. I know that you've been pursuing the use of airships for logistics in Canada for as long as I can remember. Can you give us an update on how the progress on that is going? And is there the beginning of a groundswell of support for their use?
Well, I wish I could say there was a groundswell of support. I think there's a coming recognition that we have to do something different, and it's because of climate change. Those high temperatures you're feeling in Europe this year and also across all of the US are also coming to Canada, and we have an El Nino in the background, which is to come probably in the fall. What this means is that we won't be able to use the ice roads to get to all of our remote communities, which there are no permanent roads. Again, for those listening, roughly 70% of Canada's landmass has no roads. And yet we have people living there. We have 300 some odd villages that are served only by small airplanes, or in the wintertime can receive trailers over the ice roads for about a month. That time has been shrinking, and as climate change persists, the ice is getting thinner and they're becoming more dangerous. So inevitably, we have to have a solution. And building roads is not an economic solution. It's just horribly expensive, and the distances are very long. So the airships ultimately are going to be come upon as the solution, and I keep working towards that. But there is a very large market in Canada, both for remote supplies. We figure there's about demand for 8 30-ton lift airships just for the remote communities. And a single mine can take up another 6 30-ton lift airships to serve its needs. So, and we have lots of mining opportunities. So there's a big market in Canada. It's just a matter of getting it started.
Thank you very much for that, Barry. That's encouraging that the demand is there, or the demand for the capability is there. But Johannes, you've been involved in a number of airship projects over the years, including logistics airships. They haven't come to fruition. They haven't delivered yet. So is that a technical problem? Is it a financing problem, an investment problem? Looking at what Barry has just said, what do you think needs to happen to bring cargo lift logistics airships to reality? Johannes, I can't hear you, so I think perhaps you're on mute. So I'm going to ask you to start again when we can hear. Now we can hear you. Could you start again?
Yeah. You mentioned finance, and for me as an engineer, finance is one of many boundary conditions that needs to be solved. But from the engineering point of view, cargo has been transported by airships. Cargo like what is sometimes called self-loading cargo passengers. This operations exist. It works. You know, there are tourist airships around. We know about the flights in the 30s that were operated transatlantic by Zeppelin. And the problem arises if you look at heavy cargo bits that cannot be loaded and unloaded piece by piece, but you have one heavy piece of cargo and you need to think about a load exchange procedure to do this. And I think there are relatively simple ways, like one procedure I described on a conference in Mumbai in 2022 that refers to external sling load operations as it is done by helicopters. This procedure can be adapted to airships to exchange heavy loads of cargoes, and simplicity is really the key there. But it has not, as for my knowledge, not successfully been shown on how to exchange heavy bits of cargo. But I think, meanwhile, this is absolutely doable. It's just you really have to focus on keeping things simple.
Thank you very much for that, Johannes. So I'd like to ask Spencer to comment.
Thank you, Gregory. I just wanted to follow up on what Johannes mentioned to ask, given what we've seen, especially on the financing side, whether he thinks that in the cargo space, the sector's been plagued a bit by over-promising and under-delivery at all, and whether that perhaps is also creating a tension in terms of reconciling what's technically possible and what some of the expectations are that aren't being met in the market.
Hannes? Spencer asked if you might think that there had been a certain amount of over-promising and under-delivering.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, sorry, when I was a student and Gregory, we both met at Cargo Lifter. Cargo Lifter said, "Yeah, we will fly in 2 years." You know, and for me as a student and every like fellow students for aeronautical engineering, I knew for everyone was pretty clear. You know, this is not doable in 2 years. Absolutely not. This is a new type of operation, and you know, it takes its time. So maybe the development there was like over promising, and of course, yeah, this is an issue. So you need to be serious in aviation, like you know, from the first napkin sketch to entry into operations, it takes years. Like it takes quite a few years, and if you have a new type of aircraft and a new type of operations. But then on the good news is actually, yes, airships are not really new. What is new is that if you want to employ a propulsion system that is capable of doing precision hover and what is capable of doing dynamic positioning, as naval architects call it, this is new technology, right? So I think Zeppelin NT has shown, yes, it works. And like from my perspective, I think, yes, this I have been working at and have been part of the operations. And this is absolutely doable, and it still can like be engineered in a way that it's more cost efficient. So it's absolutely doable, as I said, but yes, it takes a time, and as Spencer said, you cannot promise to do this in large scale, like in just a few years.
Thank you for that, Hannes. We've got a question from Richard Whitaker, which I'll just introduce, and then I'll come back to you, Barry. But I'd like to leave the whole panel on, and whoever would like to answer this, please put your hand up. Richard Whitaker, who's listening, asks, has drone technology superseded the idea or practice of using airships, considering their size needed to lift freight? Okay, I'm going to step in there and answer it myself, I think, and then go to Barry. Airships can be drones. At the end of the day, an unmanned aerial platform is just that. It is a system that doesn't have a crew on board. And so you can have drone airships as well as manned airships, as well as multi-rotor drones, fixed-wing drones, or single-rotor drones. And so whilst I think you're probably referring to the types of drones that are being used for pizza delivery or for larger freight delivery in the fixed-wing form, especially in Africa and I believe in Spain, airships are not being considered for those roles. That is true. But I think that there are some niche operations that unmanned airships might very well be able to do in the logistics sphere. Barry, you wanted to come in. Can I ask you to say what you were going to say?
Yeah, well, a couple things. First of all, let me talk about the drone idea. I think the future is definitely going to be drones, and there's a number of reasons for that. One is, of course, just saving of weight. If you take a pilot, his chair, a door, the windows, the washroom, you're probably adding a ton to your lift to your airship. Well, take away that ton, that's a ton of freight you can carry. So just the savings and the benefit of not having a pilot on board is an advantage. The second is, if there's no pilot on board, then what would be the objection to using hydrogen? I don't feel hydrogen is unsafe, and I think we can use it now. But regulators are pretty nervous about these things. But if it's a drone with nobody on board, then what is the last objection to using hydrogen for the gas for lift? And I suppose the third thing is that if we're going to use drones, I'm really much a firm believer that we must operate from a fixed base to a fixed base. We can't have a drone hunting for where it's going to land. It has to go to a precise spot. And for cargo, you have to have ground handling anyway. I think that this is a part of the future of the airship. If I could just return quickly to the previous discussion, though, this notion of what are the barriers to the airships? Fundamentally, airships get much better as they get much bigger. But of course, as much bigger, that means you have to have a bigger building to build them in, or a hangar. And that's one of the big barriers to entry, literally, figuratively. And the other one, of course, is the patience of money to go through all the regulatory issues that are required to get certification. So what's holding back the airship industry as much as anything else is you have to have a very large pool of funds to begin with. And we have a couple of cases now, flying whales and LTA research, where that seems to be going forward. But there would be a lot more if it wasn't for that barrier.
Thank you. That's a very good point. Spencer.
I think those are terrific points. I think maybe a little bit of a perspective on Cloudline. When we started out, we had set out to exactly this logistics problem you mentioned, Gregory, some of those parts of without roads, and Barry, you've mentioned that in Canada, we were looking specifically at Africa. And I think this is one of those things as we built and then we met the reality in the field, we had to reconcile a few things. And I would just add these as considerations to the cargo debate overall. With our founding thesis, it was really that you can achieve scale perhaps in two different ways. One is that you can get a very, very large aircraft if you want to move a lot of things. And the other is that you can instead scale up a fleet of aircraft. And I think the thing to consider there, which pointed to, is that to build a very large aircraft the first time and then to do it repeatedly is a very capitally intensive and I think that's why we see the vast majority of airships in operation today commercially are indeed small platforms. Now, the other place I would push a little bit on the thesis, we've pivoted out of cargo and we now do airborne data capture of various kinds, is on this question of throughput. When you have to compete with a form which is capable of traveling a lot faster, so there and back again and there and back again, and earn money perhaps 4 times in the time that an airship might complete one journey, you're not necessarily looking at the unit economics of just a journey, but you have to consider the unit economics of an entire company. And again, those overheads, capital expenditure versus throughput and rates of transport. Of course, it does stack up very, very quickly. And I wonder have, especially with a lot of these new attempts, broken through to that level of analysis yet and fully satisfied financiers, because I have to believe that that business case fully laid out should be able to attract some capital. Now, in fairness, to counteract my very own point, I think we have a little bit of a break if we look at other nascent areas in aerospace right now. Drone delivery has not been a roaring success. The jury is out as though on whether anyone's been able to do it profitably. And the electrical vertical takeoff and landing, all this urban air mobility space has been just as challenging. So I offer all of that up for debate.
Thank you. Your offer is accepted. But what I would like to do, Spencer, if you don't mind, is to tie off this section of the discussion about logistics. And Mohammed, I haven't involved you much in the logistics discussion because you're focused on other areas of airship use, but I will come to you later. I'd like to tie it up, if you like, with a comment that has been made by the well-known aviation journalist Chris Pocock, who is listening to and watching our stream, who has given us a historical note that I would like to hear some comments on related to the FedEx project that in 1990, as most of you may know, FedEx set Lockheed Martin the task of designing a large airship that could move cargo trans-Pacific at a cost midway between that of their air freighters and their ocean freight. But Lockheed Martin were not able to meet FedEx's cost per ton mile goal. Now, I've met some of the people, as many of us have, who were involved in that design activity, which took place at the Skunk Works, the famous, covert design facility that Lockheed operated. And I've heard different variants of why the program ended. But I do know that when it ended, Lockheed were literally ready and just about to start the build of their large prototype airship, which had, if I recall correctly, a payload of 500 tons. Now, Barry, you will be familiar with this story. Johannes, you will have come across it as well. Do you have any comments to what Chris has said? I mean, cargo airships have come so close so many times. Cargo lifter, Lockheed Martin for FedEx, but there are other examples if you think back. Yes, I understand the finance issue is always a big one, but what's been the straw that has prevented the camel's back from being broken, if that way?
Well, I think fundamentally one could say that there's never been what I would call commercial airships in manufacture outside maybe the Zeppelin NT and the earlier Zeppelins. Everything that was built was basically a first off, a prototype almost. And so we had accidents with those, which we will have with a brand new machine. And that really hit people's confidence before the Second World War. Since that time, of course, we haven't really seen any big airships in the air until the Pathfinder 1, which is now under trial. So we really haven't had a good example of what could be, in my mind, any basis of.
Okay, that's a good way of looking at it. Thank you very much for that, Barry. With that, I want to move on from cargo and freight to the next application that I want to cover, which is going to be advertising. Advertising has been at various times the mainstay of modern airships since the 1970s. At one point, as many as 35 airships flying around the world, advertising brands and attending sporting events. That number has since shrunk fairly significantly. But what is it about advertising that lends itself to airships? And why are airships so popular for advertising, Mohammed?
Yeah, so in the advertising with the airship is we can say it's one of the future. As the past, this is a very good history about the airships are working in the advertising field, but with the time it shrunken, as Gregory said. But next we can make it more workable in the industry. And there is all the cities where always we see thousands of billboard, and also this is like really used to it everyone to see daily billboards. But when enters airship, it is one of the future in the advertisement landscape, like as working on the autonomous airship autonomous system. So we can definitely and work on the futuristic cities where airships will float according to different routings, according to audience behaviors, and specifically target each of the target audience, like where is the schools, where is the event happening, or some of the other areas like enjoyment park and beaches. So according to this, we can think and imagine about the future and how we can enhance the airship in this like advertising space. So that's about my
Thank you.
side.
Thank you very much, Mohammed. That's a very clear view that you've expressed. So I'd like to come to Barry to ask a question about advertising. I know that advertising is not your core business in the supply chain world and the Aspen School of Business, but as a part of a business cycle, why does an advertising airship retain value in a digital first media world?
Well, it's certainly become a lot tougher. Just as the newspapers have figured out, internet advertising has been the rage for the last 20 years, and that's hurt the airship industry. And really, after 9/11 was another issue that came along and kind of knocked the industry. But one of the things that's a real benefit and was pointed out to me is that on every flight, you can cash 3 or 4 different checks. You can cash one check for the advertising on the side of the airship. You can cash one check as the broadcasting platform or telecommunications platform. You can cash another check, security feature for whatever event you're monitoring. And then finally, maybe you carry passengers too. So there's a good revenue source coming with advertising blimps, but they do have a pretty high operating cost.
Yes, I've experienced that myself, and you're absolutely right. They do. Johannes, I think you wanted to say something a little bit earlier.
Yes, I mean airships are huge and they are slow, so and they are flying low, so they can be seen. And I think Hugo Eckener, the back then CEO of Deutsche Zeppelin Reederei, has once been quoted saying his background was also in psychology, and he once said he's quite aware what an impact this has when you see something of the size of a container ship or of a tanker flying above your house and just not falling down. This is kind of a surreal appearance and a positive like impact on the people who see this. They always want to remind, yeah, this was fantastic. And Goodyear airship has about the year 2000, they issued a study and figuring, okay, what is actually the worth of the two blimps we are operating, because they are so expensive and maintenance and the operating costs are high. Can we still afford this? So they started a study on figuring out the worth of these three airships, the Goodyear blimps. And they found this is actually priceless. If you want to build up what these three Goodyear blimps are presenting, it would cost billions if you want to start this from the scratch again. So they figured, yes, okay, it's still, they are expensive, but it's still a good business. And now let's go to some newer airships. And so they exchanged their fleet of all with three Zeppelin airships of new technology. So I think airships leave a very, special impression on people who see it, and this is why they are excellent for advertisement.
Okay, thank you very much. Spencer, you operate airships for other roles than advertising, but do you see them as an adjunct to what you use them for, as a revenue generator, as advertising platforms as well?
Absolutely. And we've done both, Gregory. So we've done dedicated advertising campaigns. And we've done, as Barry mentioned, the ability to perform multiple roles, advertising and doing something else like data capture. I would just like to add something to what the other two panelists said. They do not necessarily have to be very expensive in operation. And I think that's, when we look at the autonomous end of things and at the platform scale that we're working with, especially the fact that we run on, we really, really get those costs all the way down. And I think there's a general rule in hardware that people may be able to stick to, which is that as you scale things up, for their complexity and their cost is non-linear. And it increases non-linearly to the scale. And I think that is true also of the OpEx and maintenance of these aircraft. That said, they are no less novel. To Johannes's point, something being spotted in the sky, we have a general fatigue. We don't notice ads on our screens anymore. We don't notice them by the roadside. But it's very, very hard to miss something we're floating about. So we've seen good inbound demand, even on dedicated advertising campaigns.
That's excellent. Thank you very much, Spencer. What I'd like to do now is move on to our next set of applications. And the set of applications that I'd like to look at next is passenger operations. And I'm going to divide these into two parts. Passenger operations for cruising, tourism, pleasure, safaris, and that sort of thing first. But then I also want to talk about commuter routes and short-term, short-distance movement of people in larger numbers. So none of us have been involved in passenger operations with the airship work that we've done, except perhaps Johannes, with the Zeppelin NT, which carries passengers routinely. So I'm going to come to you, Johannes. In terms of passenger operations, do you think that the routes that are available that are suitable for airships are sufficient to create a market big enough to sustain airships designed purely for passenger tourism?
Yeah, I mean, what we see today is the passenger transport operated by Deutsche Zeppelin Reederei in Friedrichshafen, and this is done commercially. And from my knowledge, that it's the only airline operator that does commercial passenger transport with airships. So it works. They have their business case mainly being, okay, we are doing like pleasure rides around Lake Constance in Munich and Berlin, and you have seen them in London, flying over London, and so yes, this works, right? But if you think about commuter, this using airships for commuter passenger transport, this is kind of tricky. There is a study from the 1980s, I think, from NASA that has found, okay, airships are more affected by whether the helicopters or commuter category airplanes, so this is kind of difficult. You have to cancel flights and so. What is more interesting is if you have like experiential travel. So you fly the idea of flying interesting routes, what Zeppelin back in the days did, like flying to Egypt or flying to the Mediterranean and or even around the world, like 90 years ago, right? So it's a special type of traveling. Hugo Eckner called this voyaging rather than traveling. That means the journey itself is the experience. And if you think like of our days, where business people think about deceleration and using the time they need to travel from A to B for work or for conferences or so. So there are many ways or business ideas to use airships that are slower than airplanes, but use the time and the comfort and the view, right? And to offer a very special type of voyaging and to do meetings and so. And yes, I think this is really possible. It has been shown back. It was not cheap. It's not that you fly, from Hamburg to Frankfurt for $50 or so. This is not possible with Airship, and it doesn't make sense. But if you think, hey, let's have a journey to cross the Atlantic and do this in a comfortable way, have a lounge, have a bar, and use the time rather than like rushing from A to B. I think there's a very interesting market out there.
Barry, let me come to you as a business school professor. I mean, do you think that Johannes's last point about this deceleration of business, the use of time more effectively, has a potential trigger within it for airships to become passenger vehicles, not just for tourism, but for a sort of board meeting that you could have over a whole day on an airship, where people relax and chat, have the formal meeting, you enjoy the view, no pressure, and then you fire the guy at the end of the day. I mean, but seriously, do you think that there is a role in conventional business because of the deceleration effect of airships on their passengers?
I think there's two points here which I'd like to make. One is I hate jet lag. I don't know anybody who really does like it. And some people seem to tolerate it better than others. But if you're going from North America to Europe, if you can do that in 36 or 48 hours on an airship, I don't think you'd suffer the same jet lag as you would on a jet. And secondly, the ability to take your office with you. You can do all the work at your office in your cabin in the airship quite easily. So I don't think there would be any waste of time in terms of doing that. So those are two factors. The third one is we have to recognize that sooner or later, we're going to get serious about carbon emissions. And that means that jet airplanes are going to be expensive. We know that airships can very easily be electrically, and hydrogen makes a lot of sense. So zero carbon emissions, and that may make that price wedge that helps to put the airship in the picture. So I think there's a number of reasons to believe it's possible. I don't think it's the first market. I think this will come after we get success with cargo airships and people have more confidence with the safety and the reliability of airships.
Spencer, I'd like to put an idea and see if you think it has any merit in this field of tourism. Do you think it's possible that airships of the size of yours, remotely piloted, could be used for what I would describe as remote tourism, where an airship goes into an area of natural beauty, controlled by a group of tourists who are going on a safari or something? They're not actually physically there, but they're in a wonderful, comfortable theater with a massive screen, watching your airship follow the pride of lions or whatever it happens to be. Do you think there's a place for that sort of use of airships in tourism?
I love that idea, Gregory. It first occurred to me when we were all at home down in COVID, and Cloudline had started just prior to that, and so this was one of those ideas floating around as to whether we could offer such a service. Now, what I will say is the good news is we have all the tech to that today. So if anyone is listening, they want to trial something like that with us, we can have you direct or create new GPS waypoints via an online interface, and we can also provide a secure direct stream of whatever we're looking at and point the particular direction. So we would be thrilled to collaborate with folks on something like that. But it did occur to me as Johannes and Barry were speaking, there are certain sites that one would just want to see from an aerial view. I think of the big waterfalls like Victoria Falls, or as you say, wildlife. And I think there would certainly be demand for something like that.
Okay, and Mohammed, I wanted to bring you in on this because Pakistan is a beautiful country. It is not famous for its regular tourism, but you have a lot of tourists who want to climb mountains. But there are an equal number of people who perhaps aren't able to go and climb mountains for a variety of reasons in Pakistan. Perhaps you could use airships in the same way I've just suggested with Spencer, and Spencer's been discussing, to offer them remote access to sites in Pakistan. Do you think that's something that would be welcomed in Pakistan if it could be done? You're on mute, Mohammed.
Yeah, it definitely welcomed in Pakistan. As you said, this is everyone know about Pakistan tourism. Most of the people came for tourist as it is a tourist and second largest mountain bird. So to show Pakistan's landscape and the mountain areas and the beauty of Pakistan, actually there is a northern side of Pakistan really beautiful. The many tourists came every year, and the number of tourists increase every year. A mass number of increase happens. So there is a very great idea and a very great use case if there is a live stream and show that areas of Pakistan. So it definitely will be a.
Thank you very much for that. Barry, you wanted to make a point, I think.
Just one that, tourism itself tends to be seasonal. And one of the advantages of airships is that they can move. So you could have airships coming and looking at whale watching off of Vancouver for a couple of months, and then they could go someplace else and see something different. So it is possible to have airships move around, which is an advantage. The disadvantage of airships, and we've seen this even talking to people at Zeppelin, is the tourists don't really want to go up in rainy, cold, nasty weather. So your utilization of the vehicle sometimes is very difficult. And this also comes into the area of booking and rebooking passengers and disappointing people. So part of the tourism is it depends what your weather is. So again, a tropical place. And finally, you need a large number of people to be taking these because it's not going to be inexpensive. We know the rates tend to be fairly high for the Zeppelin NT, for example. So a location like Cancun, Mexico, where you have thousands of people coming in and maybe would like to take a day to see the jungle or whatever around, that would be a location where I could see things happening, or Niagara Falls in Canada. And I'm sure in Europe, there's many places that could be done during the summertime. So these sorts of tourist areas. My one final point is that, and I think this was demonstrated by the experience in Japan and in California, where a Zeppelin NT was, used for tourism. I don't think you can make a tourism operation work with one vehicle. I think you have to have a fleet of at least maybe 3 in order to have redundancy and to have enough activity to pay the overhead that works. So there is a need for a bigger operation in that sense.
That's a very interesting point about an operation to make it more financially viable, especially in the field of tourism. A very good one. Johannes.
Yes, as Barry mentioned, the fuel price due to CO2 emissions or to geopolitical issues. There is a recent study by the German Aerospace Society about the future of flight, and the study says that it's in the not too far future. We probably will see fuel prices doubling or even five-folding. And if you see at the operating cost of airplanes, of passenger and cargo airplanes, about half of the operating costs are due to fuel and fuel burn. So they are very sensitive to fuel price changes. If you look at airship operations, for example, Zeppelin NT at the Bodensee, they would say, yeah, we need fuel, but it's not a big thing, right? So this is not absolutely, totally not the part of our operating cost. That means airships are very resilient to fuel price changes, like CO2 prices or geopolitical issues, and this makes airships again very interesting for the future.
Yes, indeed. Thank you very much for that, Johannes. Now, I need to catch up, gentlemen, on the comments we've been receiving from our viewers, and we have a few. So what I'm going to do is read out the name of the commenter there, and when I've finished all the comments, if any of you would like to respond to those comments, please stick your hands up. But we have three comments actually from Richard Whitaker again. As far as airship tourism goes, why have we not seen more air safari tourism exploitation in day trips in rural areas of outstanding beauty? He then says, excuse me, I would love to see a collaboration between the shipping cruise sector and the use of airships for aerial tour excursions in conjunction with the growing cruise sector. Imagine MSC Cruises, NCL, or P&O, to name a few, advertising their cruise brand on the side of an airship, which could be an option. And finally, Richard says, could airships be used for tourism around the Norwegian fjords, Alaska, Dubai, or Egypt? Well, first of all, I tried to introduce airships for tourism into Dubai, and the investment community in the Middle East wants things that will happen immediately. They're not willing to wait even the short time it would have taken to get an airship to Dubai. So that didn't quite work out as I had hoped. But what I would say is if there's anybody listening or watching from the cruise industry who would like to introduce us, the Airship Association, as a sort of independent broker to the right people in the cruise industry, we would love to make those introductions because it is evident that the cruise industry is growing enormously. And those are absolutely partners that we could work with. Barry.
Actually, I wrote a paper on this topic. And the fundamental issue was, if you're going to have ecotourism, you want to take people into wild and unsettled areas, where do they stay? How do you get there to get onto the airship? You can't be flying from a settled area to an airship all that distance just to see for a few hours what you're going to see. So how do you look after the people in the remote area? And the cruise ship obviously is a solution. It's a floating hotel. It's also the case that the people who are on cruise ships, my cruise, and it was quite enjoyable. And I think I gained 10 pounds because all I did was eat. And I think that seems to be the great passion on these ships. But you do get bored. And the possibility of being able to take an airship from that cruise ship out to see something more would be quite an interesting prospect. So we looked at this, especially for the Arctic, where, again, it's very remote and very difficult for people to get to, but an airship would be a great solution for that.
Yes, indeed. Thank you for that. Let me just look through the other comments. I think I'm not going to be able to read every single one out, but Mikhail Baskov has suggested, in line with your weight gain on your cruise, that perhaps airships should offer dinner cruises over London and Paris and other major cities lasting several hours, where we feed our passengers whilst they lean out of the window if the food doesn't agree with them, although that might not go down too well either. But I think there are a lot of passenger applications. I think we didn't really get too much into the commuting role of passenger airships, but I think it's of note that at least one Spanish regional airline has placed orders for a number of hybrid air vehicles in order to move people in a sort of hub and spoke manner to the slightly more remote towns and villages that they serve currently with expensive and not particularly sustainable lighter twin-engined aircraft. So, Barry, let's talk a little bit about commuting.
Yeah, I think there's especially where you have water crossings that can't easily be bridged. So thinking, for example, from to Northern Ireland from Liverpool, or from Scotland to the Shetland Islands, or the Majorca Islands of Spain, or any place where you have a water crossing that isn't really very easy. We have out of Vancouver to Victoria, two of our cities on the West Coast, a gap, and there's small airplanes, 12, 14 passengers flying back and forth all the time, carrying people. Well, an airship that could carry 50 or 100 would be a lot less expensive. And in a short trip like that, the speed wouldn't matter so much. It would be still quite fast enough. So I think there's a role for the airships, especially where you're crossing water boundaries.
Okay, thank you very much indeed for that, Barry. I want to go back to an earlier comment that I hadn't read out because I wanted to wait until this moment. But before I do, we're moving on time-wise through our allotted minutes for this debate, and so I want to take this opportunity to ask Dean if he would kindly show us a little bit about our Airship Association website. I'm scrambling through my notes here, but we have a little video that we want to show you about the Airship Association website, which is developing and evolving quite rapidly now, and you will see more changes to come. I can't hear any sound. I hope others can. Right. Well, thank you for that reminder of our website. I mean, obviously, some of you may be watching on our website, which is fantastic. So you already have found it. But for those who may not have taken the time to look through the website, it has changed quite a bit. It is continuing to change over time. We're adding new pages in the next couple of weeks. So please do look out for the website, have a closer look at it, look through it, and let's now get back to the debate. So now that we're back to the debate, I would like to move on to another topic by using this comment that I had mentioned from Mikhail Baskov. He says, as with any advanced technology, abundant funding can suddenly appear if this tech can be used by the military. Sadly, airships are too big targets and too slow to be usable in combat or supporting roles. I'd like to make a comment on this because what I want us to debate are some of the military and paramilitary roles that airships might have. Now, Mikhail is probably right in one respect. Airships are unlikely to be used in direct combat. Airships would never be positioned in a vulnerable point because the cost of losing one would be too great. But I don't agree that airships have no military role. I think they have a significant military role. We've already talked about cargo, and of course there's the military logistics role that airships have a tremendous opportunity to support. And I'm aware of a lot of studies that were done when I was in the UK Ministry of Defence by both ourselves and our US counterparts at US Transcom, looking at the use of airships for transporting things around the world. And they have some significant advantages, ironically in speed, as well as in capability. Because if you have to move a large military unit from one continent to another with limited resources, it takes quite a long time to do it. With airships, as long as they're sufficiently large to take perhaps a few hundred people or 500 tons of cargo, you can actually move large military formations much faster. But more importantly, I think airships have other roles as well, in communications and in surveillance. And in those roles, you don't need them to be sat in harm's way. The US Navy airship program of the 80s and 90s went as far as developing a whole concept of operations for an airship that would provide early warning over a carrier battle group. At the moment, this is provided by fixed-wing airplanes that are expensive to operate, are in the air only for a relatively modest number of hours. But this concept involved having a maritime airship that was considered and operated as if it were a ship. So it would be at sea for 30 days. It would do in-flight replenishment, the decks of aircraft carriers or other ships. And it would have a crew of 30 who would live and work on the airship for that period of time. The Sentinel 1000 airship, built by Airship Industries, was in fact a half linear scale model of what the US Navy airship was going to be, the YEZ or Y2A. But I wonder if anybody would like to comment on military applications for airships from the panel. Barry.
There's a couple of interesting things. I mean, you're absolutely right about logistics. And we need this in the Arctic in a very important way, because we just simply can't get things there by regular means, and certainly not big loads year round. So we do need the airships for logistics for sure. But the other one, which I think is always very interesting, is the Akron and Macon. These were flying aircraft carriers, and had they not had accidents, that might have moved into a very interesting development in terms of the airplanes aboard a mothership. Well, today what we have is drone wars, and that's going to be the future for sure. And an airship could carry a lot of drones, and albeit it's a big target, but you can also have a lot of defenses on board, jamming systems and even defensive equipment on board to protect the airship. Of course, anything that's visible from space is a target. I guess submarines are maybe the only ones that aren't an easy target, but we hear about cargo killers, or sorry, aircraft killers, as well as other things. So yes, the airships are a big target, but I'd say, so what? Everything's a target days. But the possibility of having drones on an airship, move them up to 10,000 feet, you can see that drone for a long distance. So being able to control the drone, and I mean, these are quadcopter type drones or winged drones with bombs. They can be sent a long distance under control, and you'd be well back from the front lines. So I think there is a military role as well.
Thank you for that, Barry. Any other comments on the direct military role? I'd like to raise, and I'll ask you to introduce this new variation of military roles, which is maritime and border patrol as a quasi-military role, if you like, Spencer.
Thank you, Gregory. And yes, I was about to mention security at large, and I think these are the very next sectors adjacent to direct military involvement or contested. As you mentioned, borders, whether they're land borders or maritime borders or exclusive economic zones of areas that are incredibly difficult to monitor. And I think that something that comes up a lot, when we speak to prospective customers, is what about satellites? And I think the disadvantage of satellites is that although they can see very large areas, you very often are going to just have that 90-minute cycle time for the low Earth orbit satellites, so they can't really stay in a particular place. And I think the other thing, when we start getting into some of the very specific technologies like synthetic aperture radar, is even the availability to point those satellites. at particular places. And so borders are of particular interest. But I think even more broadly in civil sea, if you think about wide area monitoring capabilities, and there I would encourage viewers to think, again, a little bit of a plug for smaller platforms, to think about these possibilities in the same way that we have constellations of satellites in order to create global coverage, ways in which we can have constellations of airships effectively and cover very wide areas.
Okay, thank you very much indeed for that. I'd encourage our audience to comment or question us on any of the topics that we're covering, including military ones. I'd like to come to you and ask you if you, in the boosters, obviously your focus is advertising, but have you considered speaking to your government about the use of your airships for border security? You're on mute, sir.
So as the main business niche is advertising, so as once I have offered from one of the military side about the surveillance and the like a silent some ship that will work in this field. But that time we was early phase of the boosters, and we are just working on the advertising technology. So therefore, that didn't work on that. But this is like a potential, and this is a demand about airships, because they are endurance and like a quit, and we can make it more workable, silently move anywhere, and surveillance all the area for a long time.
Thank you very much for that, Mohammed. Yeah, that's absolutely right, I think. I'd like to add another color to the overall sort of government use of airships. We've talked about defense in the sense of warfighting. We've talked about Earth observation in the sense of border patrol. But actually, there's another side of Earth observation, which is environmental monitoring, climate monitoring, agro monitoring, monitoring agriculture, and a whole range of Earth observation missions that are not military, they're not security necessarily, but they use many of the same mission systems and sensors that a military mission might choose to use. Do you have any thoughts on those, panel members? Hannes? Johannes?
Mute. So, the Jülich Institute in Germany has a long record of doing scientific missions with the Zeppelin NT, and they are doing atmospheric surveys. They have been flying up to Finland doing this, and the scientists they just love it. They say there is a very low vibration level on board of an airship, and we can even float with the air being part of the atmosphere. What is interesting for taking specific probes of air, and they totally love it. It's they can stay on board for many hours. They have, as one of the pilots, Kate Borg, would say, they have a loo with the view, and it's very convenient. And so right now, the Jülich Institute is doing an atmospheric survey with the Zeppelin airship, and it has been done also in the past, like 9 years ago. And you have these specific features. You can fly very slow without having downwash, without having disturbance from the engine exhaust, and this low vibration level, as I said. So this makes airships a very interesting vehicle for these kinds of scientific work.
I remember, in fact, in the 1990s, the port of The Hague had a problem with the cargo ships that were using the port, in that there were very strict regulations on the types of fuel that the ships could use. But what they would do in the harbor, they would use the clean fuel that was expensive, and they'd leave the harbor and about 5 or 6 nautical miles offshore, switch over to the much cheaper dirty fuel that they were not supposed to use, but they used because it would save them money. And so the Port of The Hague commissioned an airship mission, which saw an airship following these giant cargo ships out to sea, quite close behind them. And the airship would sit in the exhaust plume from the smokestack of the ship. And whenever a ship switched over to the dirty fuel, they were able to measure that. And the ship owners were then fined. And the interesting thing, because the airship was flying slowly and quietly, when you're moving on a platform, you're generally looking forwards. And so sometimes the airship was as close as 50 meters behind the bridge of these cargo ships. And they could see all of the crew and the captain looking forwards and just not noticing them. And suddenly they'd switch over to the dirty fuel. And I think the airship had a horn on it or something. And they would blow the horn and they'd all look around and panic because they're going to be fined. But there are some very interesting niche uses. And Johannes, maybe you could add to this.
Yeah, I love this story with the horn. So I talked on several occasions to the EMSA, what is the European Maritime Safety Agency, the European Coast Guard, and this is exactly what they are doing, because the regulations from the IMO, the International Maritime Organization, with respect to sulfur and sulfur oxide emissions from heavy oil from ships it's getting more and more strict, right? And the plan is that this will continue over the next years. Very high demand on monitoring these sulfur exhaust behind ships. So, and the EMSA said, yes, we have like a fleet of 150 kilo drones, which are doing exactly this. And the point is, they were kind of not happy with the endurance of these fixed wing drones they are also using wing drones for this, but again, the bottleneck there is the endurance, and I think this would be an excellent field of applications for airship drones.
Spencer, have you considered doing this sort of monitoring for maritime organizations?
Maritime organizations per se, Gregory. We've got the nickname of the Cape of Storms for no reason. So we have not necessarily had the best of our coast to send airships out. But more broadly speaking, environmental monitoring is right now our bread and butter at Cloudline. And it comes in various forms. One which is very important and which is not necessarily punitive, but has an economic benefit for the client also, is monitoring pipelines and finding methane in natural gas pipelines. And this is very important because both a greenhouse impact if the gas leaks, but it's also lost product for a customer. So there's mutual incentive for everybody to solve that problem. And perhaps one of the things we didn't mention that airships are really good at in this regard is that they don't have any stall speed. So they sort of sit between the compromise you would have with multi-rotor drones or with fixed-wing drones, which may be able to go the distance, but can't really slow down to a particular area. And airships really can go from a long-distance cruise and into a hover mode in order to capture more granular data. Perhaps just one other quick one that the audience may find interesting is the new focus right now also on carbon quantification in nature-based sources. And this is done by capturing vegetation using LiDAR. So you are doing a precise volumetric measurement of trees. And that's important when we look at national carbon stocks, private initiatives But it's the same kind of technology that gets used to monitor vegetation under power lines, for example, as well. So environmental monitoring really is a very broad and very, very exciting area for airships right now.
Super, thank you. Barry, did you? Yes, I think you did. Over to you, sir.
I do. Well, we do have an interesting problem in Canada, which is forest fires. Although it's not unique to Canada, I see it's in Europe and many other places, and climate change is going to bring us more of that. So, what we've been working on is the idea of a drone airship. You can see the model behind me over my shoulder. We call it the Orbo, which essentially is a drone that just goes up and sits at, say, 5,000 feet and has small drones on board that you can dispatch with fire extinguishers. So when you see a fire, they could immediately go out and try and put it out, which has been done with gentlemen rappelling off helicopters, but that's a very dangerous process to try and get the fires early. The possibility of doing this is improved because, again, AI. We have some folks that we're working with who are looking at using AI to interpret infrared and video to be able to determine that's a smoke or mist. Is that a lightning strike or a bear in the forest? And if you can identify a fire early and then dispatch a drone to put out that fire, we could save a lot of costs and misery from forest fires.
Thank you very much for that, Barry. That's most interesting. Right. So we are close to running out of time, sadly. There are so many other things we could discuss. And in fact, topics here that we have not managed to get through, probably due to my poor moderating. But let me just run through them. Infrastructure and surveillance mapping, telecommunications, gas transport, disaster relief. These are all potential uses for airships that we're not going to have time to cover properly today. But before we do close, and we will have another opportunity to discuss applications for airships and what they are truly good for in the future. But before we finish today, what I'd like to ask each panel member to do is to summarize what they have thought about the topics we've discussed today and whether they think there is going to be any significant change in the public perception airships are good for over the coming years. I'm going to start with you, Spencer.
Thank you, Gregory. I think all of the applications we've discussed today are very, very exciting. What I would leave with our viewers is the thought that as we compare airships to other technologies, we also need to be giving the competing technologies the benefit of the doubt. We need to be comparing to the future state when we talk future state of airships that would be competing with them. And I think that's a very important aspect to the debate as well when we weigh up the pros and cons.
Thank you very much for that, Spencer. That's something that airship proponents often don't really take into account, and that is that it's not just our technology that's developing, it's everybody else's. So, Mohammed, has this been a useful experience for you, and do you think that the boosters is going to be able to grow and expand in both advertising and perhaps other applications as well?
Yeah, so there was a lot of use cases and lot of all the information I got from all the members is very useful. And about the boosters, definitely the boosters from advertising to other spaces we will move, and also from like other members like Cloudline, they are also one of the best technology like autonomous system, and other than that our professors. So the boosters mainly working on of advertisement. So in the meantime, we will dominate in the advertisement market. We will work on the surveillance and the agriculture side as well, because there is also a huge shell in this market, and that thing we can easily do it with the airships. So
Thank
definitely
you
there's
very
a,
much.
lot of us. Yeah.
Okay, Mohammed, thank you very much indeed. Johannes, your thoughts on what we've discussed and whether you think there's going to be a change in the public perception as we move forwards.
Yeah, I think we have been discussing many possible applications. So at the capabilities of airships flying, doing vertical takeoff and landing missions, and doing the sustainable long range high endurance, and where flying low and slow is not like a burden, but is not only acceptable but maybe necessary for these missions. This can address missions for transport and bridging, ISR, advertisement. You can have aerial displays, and I think there are many, many applications as we have seen today where airships can excel, and there are missions that no other aircraft heavier than air can actually do. So um, explicitly, when it comes to sustainability and lowering carbon emissions, this might be a very important future for airships.
Thank you very much, Johannes. And Barry, any comments you'd like to close?
Well, I think as an analogy, the airship industry has so many lines fishing. Sooner or later, we're going to get a bite, and that once we have a success, I think the public opinion will change. I've been expecting to see something more happen faster with Pathfinder 1, but that process is still underway. We haven't really seen the public engaged in that and what they're doing. But we only need to have one success like that to ignite the whole industry, in my view. And there's lots and lots of applications. I will accept the point that there are other technologies. We have to always be aware of that. But there are some things that airships can do that just are not possible to be done by any other technology at this point. So those where I think we're going to see the breakthroughs.
Thank you very much, Barry. Now, we have a lot of other questions that our viewers and listeners have sent, which we're simply not going to have time to answer today. So that gives me a chance to tell you that our next debate with a new panel will be held in December. And that debate will cover a new set of topics, and we will publicize those topics as well as the panel members nearer the time. I will give you a clue. We, as the Airship Association, want to start to include our supply chain in everything that we're doing, the supply chain for the airship industry, because we tend to look at airships in terms of their design and development without really addressing how the airship development companies are solving the technology problems, the supply chain problems, and what it is they're dealing with. So in the next debate, one of the panel members will be from the supply chain, maybe more than one. We shall see. But before we wrap up, I would like to, first of all, thank all of the panel members, Professor Barry Prentice, Mohammed Mohsin Raza, Horn, and Johannes Eising. And I'd like to remind all of our watchers and listeners that if you're not already a member of the Airship Association, you absolutely should join. So before I make my closing comments, we have a short video to remind you about membership. Membership can be accessed via our website, which looks something like this. And there are a number of different types of membership that are available, from associate membership to full membership, also corporate membership. And so do please have a look at our website, see if you would like to participate in the debate moving forwards to promote airships and bring them into wider use around the globe. I'd like to thank Danny Ford for having fielded the questions and sent them to me via WhatsApp so I could pass them on to you, the panelists. I'd like again to thank our panel, and last but not least, Dean Arnett, who has put together the production of this live debate, as with all our live debates. Thank you, Dean, for all of the hard work and perseverance in putting this together. And finally, thank you all of those who are viewing this live on either Facebook or on our website or on YouTube. And we look forward to seeing you in our next debate in December 2026. Thank you very much and goodbye.